Hey everyone, Rizzo here, and today I thought it would be fun to revisit a map that many consider to be one of the mode's high points, but one that I've gone back and forth on about 27 different times: Origins. When it first launched all the way back in 2013, I remember really hating it. I thought it was overly complex, obnoxious to play, and God, that ending. It put a bad taste in my mouth, to put it lightly. But of course, opinions change over time, so where do I fall now, almost a decade later? Well, let's not waste any more time and dive right into Origins. Before getting into the good proper, I want to add a quick little disclaimer up front. I'll refer to the Black Ops 2 map occasionally, but we'll largely be covering the Zombies Chronicles version of the map here. It's the version I personally prefer, but I can totally see the argument for Black Ops 2's being the superior version. It does have the better weapons after all. First on our surprisingly long list of good is the initial setup and general accessibility. As is the case with most Blundell maps, hell, most Treyarch maps at this point, the main setup is very well designed and encourages the player to explore every location. There's the more obvious stuff like the signs around the map leading you to new locations, but then there's the more subtle stuff, like the lighting and color temperature's very purposeful utilization. And if that sounds a little weird, let me just show you. Where is your eye naturally drawn to while I walk around? Exactly, the lights casting around the corners and the little spotlights on the floor. This one highlights the buildable table, this one casts directly onto a wall weapon in case you need to quickly arm yourself, and this one draws you around the corner to the door that lets you progress to no man's land. Now in Origins, and most Treyarch maps in general, very warm, highly saturated colors, your oranges and reds, are usually the ones used to indicate that the player shouldn't go there, or that there's a zombie spawner nearby, whereas colder, desaturated colors, like the ones used on the Argus wallby and workbench, are used to direct the player to useful gear or the path forward. And while you're playing, you might not have even noticed it.
But your brain did.
However, the best example of player direction comes from the spawn room. It may not look it, but this one room tells the player so much about the map so quickly that it's genuinely kind of impressive. Let's just walk through it real quick from the perspective of a first-time player. When you spawn in, you're naturally going to want to take in your surroundings. So almost immediately, you'll be introduced to the buildable system once more with a Maxis drone piece, and the digging mechanic with the shovel sitting against the wall. Further exploration of the bunker will reveal a map that not only gives you an indication of just how big the play space actually is, but it tells the player about the conversion generators and how powering all 6 will enable the use of an ancient machine atop the dig site. And finally, once you power your first generator, you'll find that power is now a localized mechanic. Powering the generator also opens up the chest in the middle of the lab, introducing the player to the new challenge system. So, let's review what a new player has learned from just this one room. 1. Buildables are back. 2. That shovel we picked up hints at some sort of digging mechanic to discover. 3. Power is no longer a map-wide thing. Each area has its own local power source, and there's 6 total. 4. By powering up all 6 of them, we'll be rewarded. 5. There's staff pieces that we need to be on the lookout for later on. And 6. There's a new challenge system that seems to reward us for completing certain tasks. I know it may seem like an odd thing to fixate on, but this one room alone shows just how good zombies maps can be at subtly guiding new players without holding their hand like Cold War or the Final Reich's notebook system. I've said it many a time, I adore Cold War, I adore Final Reich, but this method of progression will always be my personal favorite. In addition to a well-designed setup, we have an equally well-designed, purposeful map layout. Each individual area connects to one another and flows really well once you've gone through the initial setup, and the few dead ends that do exist usually don't have a zombie spawner at said dead end. So even if you do find yourself with your back to the wall, you can take solace in the fact that you only need to worry about holding off what's right in front of you. The only exceptions to this rule are the staff tunnels. As you can see, there's a spawner right across from the record table in each one of them, which can feel a bit oppressive at times. But if you can hold out for just a few seconds, and you didn't forget the gramophone at another location again, you'll be granted a quick escape to the crazy place. Risk, reward, and all that. Additionally, there's no real, quote-unquote, empty space in the main locations. Stuff like the tank tracks, yeah, there's not much to do there for the most part, but I'm talking main areas, like the spawn room. which still has a purpose in the late game. There's a challenge chest, Wonder Fizz, conversion generator, and mystery box spawn, as well as the quick revive machine. So even though it might not be your primary holdout area, there's still a reason to go back to it later on. Same goes for Generator 6. You wouldn't normally go back there, but because there's a conversion generator, Wonder Fizz orb, and a challenge box back there, there's actual reason to revisit that location every now and again. This next point about the map design is the one I really want to focus on, and that's how the map feels. Unlike most of Blundell's other maps, Origins is very deliberately designed to feel claustrophobic at all times. Narrow corridors, tight staircases, and, of course, trenches make up a large amount of the map's play spaces. Even the wide open places like No Man's Land and the Crazy Place have elements in place to make them feel cramped, even though they're relatively wide open at first glance. The constantly shifting walls of the Funny Place is the most obvious example. But then you have the rest of the map, which, even though it should feel like an easy, wide open arena, feels oddly cramped. I think the best example of this is the area surrounding and including Generator 4. From this overhead view, it looks pretty wide open, right? But when you actually play in it, it feels super cramped. Why? Because of some very intentionally placed items. For starters, there's mud placed near the entrance to slow you down, with only a few boards to jump between so you stay at maximum speed. And since zombies is a constant game of keep away, a player, consciously or not, recognizes that very specific set of movements of jump to this board, stay in the mud for this amount of time, jump to that board, and then jump onto the generator platform as the optimal path. The actual generator platform seems pretty wide open too, but it has a couple spawners near the mystery box, so that area is automatically registered as risky in a player's mind. So, naturally, you path around the generator the Juggernog way, only to see a work table and Wonder Fizz machine adding even more collision to your path. All of this subtly guides you into a relatively narrow action set, so to speak, when zombies are around, resulting in a very subtle claustrophobic effect. If you were wondering why this area always seems so cramped, that's why. Alright, pull up the audio.
So subtle you might not have even noticed, but your brain did.
Continuing with the accessible setup, we have the Staffs of the Ancients. Well, at least the base variants, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Each variant's part acquisition is so naturally introduced. Let's just go through them one by one. The one you're probably going to be introduced first to, as long as you're not completely ignoring the digging mechanic, is the Ice Staff. When you find your first Ice Staff part, you'll put 2 and 2 together like, oh shit, I've never picked up one of these before. And it's snowing right now, so maybe that's the only time I can get these. Which encourages the player to hold a zombie and run around as much of the map as they can before the snow stops. Next up, the Lightning Staff. There's one part that's super visible in a giant's footprint, but it's inaccessible by normal means. By taking in your surroundings, you can notice that there's tank tracks in the mud that go right next to this platform. So you naturally come to the conclusion, I think I can get up there if I jump off the tank at just the right time. When that inevitably works, you're eager to continue riding the tank around to see if there's any more pieces hidden like that in a similar manner. Moving on, there's the Wind Staff. Upon coming into close contact with a giant, a keen-eyed player will notice that one foot is lit up. Now, what have video games taught us? If it glows, it goes. So of course, you'll shoot at it, and while you may not step under it initially, you'll eventually get curious and give it a shot. When you do, you'll be sucked up into the giant head and faced with your first Wind Staff piece, which, naturally, makes you think there's probably a piece in every single giant. And finally, there's the Fire Staff, which is a bit of an oddity compared to the other 3. Its parts are instead acquired through basic map progression. The first part is awarded from killing the first Panzer Soldat, which is always guaranteed to spawn in at round 8 if the player has opened the door to No Man's Land, so there's no way you're gonna miss it. The second is obtained from activating Generator 6, and the final piece can be obtained by shooting down a glowing biplane flying around the site. Because of the pure scale of the giants and that massive vortex in the sky, a new player is guaranteed to look up and marvel at them quite often. So again, it's highly unlikely you'll miss it. As for the staffs themselves, they're all fantastic. Well, at least the upgraded ones. The base Ice and Wind Staff are a bit not great. When upgraded, the basic attacks all gain an increase in power, but when charged up, they'll unleash an incredibly devastating area of effect attack that eviscerates anything at range at any round. Or round 112 if the wiki is to be believed. Actually, give me a sec, I'm gonna test that. Oh shit, they were right. And turns out, the rabbit hole goes even deeper, as someone on Twitter pointed out to me. After round 112, there's these things called full frozen rounds, where you can't one-shot any of the zombies if they weren't damaged first. I know that's probably old news to those of you that high round these games, but I'm not really a high round gamer myself. I usually only play until 50, maybe 60 before I'm like, yeah, that's enough for me. But I thought it was a neat little tidbit to add regardless. Every staff also comes with an upgraded melee attack that can one-hit zombies much longer than normal. Combine that with Widow's Wine and Swordflay in Black Ops 3, and you're going to be getting one-hit kills for quite a while. And last but not least, flipping the staff around allows players to revive teammates from range with a projectile attack similar to the upgraded ballistic knife, albeit with a much slower travel time. But the staffs aren't the only special tools at your disposal. There's the 1-inch punch, giant strike beacons that draw in zombies and wipe them off the face of the earth, and the elemental punches you acquire towards the end of the quest, which deal massive damage. Including the staves, there's not a single miss in this batch. Each one is practical, fun to use, and fits perfectly with Origins' shift towards mysticism-infused reality. The worst thing I can say about them is that the power scaling between the upgraded staffs is a bit inconsistent. Like, the Wind Staff's Tornado and the Ice Staff's Activision Blizzard can one-hit kill at any round, but the pure area denial of the Ice Staff completely eclipses it. Again, they're all incredibly strong and can single-handedly take you to round 100 if you have the time. It's just that some of them are clearly more versatile than others. And one final gameplay element I want to talk about is the digging mechanic, primarily because of how deceptively intricate it is. It would have been just fine if all you did was grab a shovel and dig up some bonuses every now and again, like Terra Maledicta, but in keeping with the rest of the map, there's a ton more to it. If you use the shovel enough times, you'll eventually be rewarded with a golden shovel that gives you higher chances of digging up something good, like power-ups. And if you keep digging, you can eventually find a golden helmet that makes you completely immune to the giant's feet. You can stand right under one, the zombies around you will die, but you'll be able to walk it off like nothing ever happened. Another cool feature of the digging mechanic is that once you have the golden shovel, you can actually dig up extra perk slots from glowing dig piles. These new perk slots will even persist through downs and deaths. Here's the catch though, you can only see and interact with these piles if you have an active zombie blood power-up, and there's over 15 locations hidden throughout the dig site, so it might take you a while to find it. But to make things a bit more forgiving, the glowing dig spot will not change locations until you dig it up, so even if you have awful luck, you'll find it eventually. But if you actively want to look for it, there's another little side Easter egg that actually feeds directly into that hunt. If you shoot 3 flaming wagons with the ice staff, a zombie blood will spawn at the top of the dig site. You can do this every single round too, so it's almost like the game is actually encouraging you to go on the hunt. Whenever I play Origins in solo, this is always one of my favorite little parts, because for me, whenever I get a zombie blood, I find it boring. Zombies can't see you, so there's no tension. I know that's the point, but I just find it boring. Having the golden shovel gives the power-up new life on those common occasions where it drops and you just didn't need it. So instead of sitting there waiting for it to run out, you now have a fun little scavenger hunt to go on until the timer ticks down. With gameplay covered, let's talk about the map's story and characters. Origins takes place during World War I, where the newly formed Group 935 stumbles upon a mysterious element during an excavation in northern France. The element, coined 115, allows them to achieve scientific advancements that would let them completely decimate any world powers that oppose them with ease. Through harnessing it and the sites surrounding mysticism, they've created 1,000-foot tall mechanical giants that are completely immune to small arms fire, and the Der Wunderfizz machine to help physically empower their forces. They've also gained control of an ancient box that draws in weapons from alternate timelines, both past and future, thus explaining away the futuristic weapons found in the map. And of course, the Pack-a-Punch machine, which allows them to upgrade those weapons into even more devastating weapons of war. Spies from various nations gain word of the Germans' frightening advancements and send messages to the highest in command. Each nation then sends their top agents to the dig site with the intention of securing as much information as possible and apprehending one of Group 935's head scientists, Dr. Edward Richtofen. But just as everyone converges on the site, they find it overrun with living dead, setting the stage for Origins' main narrative, to free Samantha from Agartha and put an end to the undead threat. Throughout the map's main quest, you become privy to an entire world of straight-up magic, as opposed to the largely science-based approach of previous Zombies experiences. But the game doesn't give you too much information just yet, just enough to get your brain asking questions like, what exactly are these Crusader zombies, and why are they so determined to stop our progress? Where did these stabs even come from? What exactly was Primus and the Great War all about? And why do they look suspiciously like our new cast, even though they've been dead for thousands of years? Now, of course, we would get the answers to all of these questions in due time, none of which were satisfying, but in its own isolated little bubble, Origins presents a ton of interesting mysteries to mull over, while providing just enough concrete narrative to keep the audience on track, until the very end where it drops the ball completely. But trust me, we'll get there. Character-wise, our new quote-unquote Primus cast retains the base of what made us fall in love with Ultimus all the way back in Shin no Numa, but they're played much more realistically this time around. For example, Dempsey still has some entertainingly macho remarks about killing zombies, but he's also a respectable American soldier that takes his duties to his country and the human race very seriously. Or Richtofen. His insanity has been toned down, especially from the Broken Earth maps where he became a bit insufferable, to put it lightly, but he still manages to get in a few unhinged lines in the heat of battle. Yet when things calm down and he realizes just how badly things have gotten out of hand, it causes him to panic. You know, like a real person. Dr. Monty would later perfectly describe this cast and this entire Origins Splinter arc in Gorod Krovi.
You need to stop thinking in terms of originals, old and new. It's not like that. When you look in the mirror, it's still you. If you crack that mirror, you see multiple reflections. It doesn't mean you've actually multiplied, does it?
Look, I hate this character and what he represents as a narrative device, but man, if that ain't just the perfect way of describing something. And last but not least, the soundtrack is pretty damn solid. Well, let me rephrase that. The soundtrack itself is serviceable, but how it's incorporated into the map is fantastic. Unlike Mob of the Dead's more haunting, melancholic tunes, if that's even a word, Origins instead opts for a more eerie soundtrack with a mystical overtone, and it grows as you progress through the narrative. At the start of the match, it's pretty bog standard, but as you make your way further and further through the main quest, it builds on those earlier tracks and gives them a more magical feel. Now, it's clear that Origins has a ton going for it, but like every map, barring Burger Town, it has its fair share of imperfections. Let's start with one of my biggest issues, the staff upgrade quests. If you're going for high round gameplay and don't want to just wait for your deadwire gun to proc over and over again, you'll need to put in a bit of work to gain access to the weapons needed for said gameplay. This is where the upgraded staffs come into play. Their upgrade quest design stands in stark contrast to the well-designed simplicity of the base staff quests, because not only do the upgrade processes take a surprisingly long time to complete, especially that lightning part where you have to turn on like 16 generator switches, and have numerous steps where you have to hold a zombie, but more egregiously, every single one has at least one step that requires either insane trial and error to solve, or a cheat sheet. Now, having to trial and error puzzles isn't a bad idea. In fact, if you stare at these long enough, you may start to see patterns that lead you to the answer. And that moment when you finally crack the code after so much time staring at it is really satisfying. But the problem is, Zombies just isn't built for this. Because of the zombie bleed out timers of Black Ops 2 and 3, you can't take the time to actually focus on these puzzles in co-op, and you sure as shit can't do it in solo, because that last zombie is just gonna keep whacking you every 3 seconds. And if you make it a crawler, it'll bleed out eventually. Literally the only 2 maps in Zombies history to solve this problem were Buried, where you could get Arthur to hold a crawler indefinitely, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but The Beast from Beyond. In that map, there was an incredibly obnoxious puzzle you had to complete to get the Venom X, and the developers must have known that you couldn't do it effectively in solo because of, well, how zombies is. So they introduced a tiny little feature that allowed you to quarantine a zombie inside a glass tube, but aside from these two exceptions, zombies isn't a mode that allows for extended downtime periods, especially in solo, so putting in puzzles like this that requires said downtime is completely ass backwards and is my least favorite thing that the Blundell era brought to the table. But this doesn't just apply to Blundell's maps. After all, it'd be completely disingenuous to imply that only his maps are like this. He's just the one that started it. Dead of the Night has the Savage Impaler quest, Bodega Cervantes has that Duck Hunt minigame for the special Pack-a-Punch battery that is a massive pain in the ass in solo play, and Ancient Evil has... Nah, that one is actually pretty solid. It'd be a damn shame if this story never continued. Now, I'm also not saying that you should just hand out such powerful equipment easily. No, making the player have to put in a bit of work for something so strong is totally fine. Die Rise and Draka's bows, the Final Reich's Tesla guns, Shattered Throne's melee weapons, barring that fucking Morse code step for the Nazi axe, and Blood of the Dead's Blundergat and melee upgrades have great quests, just to name a few. The problem I have with most of the staff upgrades isn't that they're difficult. It's the time investment, the lack of reliable way to hold a zombie in solo, and almost mandatory cheat sheet usage for certain steps. Now I get that that last part doesn't bother a lot of people, so this might just be a me thing, but any upgrade quest where I have to pull out outside sources just to get through it really rubs me the wrong way. Thankfully though, the team heard the complaints from the casual crowd loud and clear, and most, but not all, future maps really tone back on this. Die Rise and Draka, Garrod Krovi, Revelations, and Ancient Evil, just to name a few, were so much more accessible and, frankly, just less of a pain in the ass. In fact, Die Rise and Draka is still, to this day, the gold standard for Blundell-style experience. I know that's a real daring thing to say, but come on, people praise that map for a reason. The initial setup is easy enough that a casual player can get a decent kit with next to no trouble. Plus, the wonder weapons, hell, even the main quest, are just accessible enough that most players can solve their mysteries with a wee bit of legwork. It's a map built for everyone. But enough of filleting Die Rise and Draka. Let's get back to Origins. I really should just bite the bullet and re-review that map someday. Aside from the complexity and general annoyance of the staff upgrades, there's a few other gameplay elements that drag Origins down just a bit. Alright, let's just rip off the band-aid. On round 8, as long as you've opened the door to No Man's Land, you'll be introduced to this map's big baddie, the Panzer Soldat.
This motherfucker right here.
Equipped with a heavily armored excavation suit, a flamethrower for crowd control, and a magnetic grappling claw because fuck you, the Panzer Soldat is easily one of Treyarch's most obnoxious enemy designs. The most obvious annoyance that I'm pretty sure every player can point to is its claw attack. If you stand still for more than a second and the Soldat has line of sight to you, it can launch its claw at you and, if it hits you, it'll drag you closer to it. While you're getting dragged in, you can shoot at the arm to force it to drop you. But if you just so happen to need to reload both of your weapons, you're kinda fucked unless you land a melee attack on the arm at just the right moment, which has a very small success window. Once it has you locked in and starts burning you, there's no traditional means of escaping. The only chance at this point is to kill it incredibly quickly or force a stun by breaking its faceplate if you haven't already. This attack is annoying on paper, but what makes it even worse is the execution. Not only can it unfairly launch the claw over inaccessible areas to get to you in Black Ops 2, but the actual hitbox on the claw attack is massive in both titles. I disabled additional AI spawning and just ran around with the Soldat for a bit to test it, and it's so bad that as you can see here, the claw can completely miss you and yet still suck you in. I haven't seen something this forgiving since Halo 5's bullet magnetism. Their flamethrower is also a big issue. But Rizzo, I hear you interject, you didn't mind the flamethrower of the Brenner or the Krasny Soldat. So what's the issue here? And you know what? That's a completely valid question. For me, it all comes down to one simple little inclusion. Those games have a health bar. Let me explain. In World War II and Cold War, you know exactly how much damage those flamethrowers are doing at any given time. So you know that it's not the end of the world if you take a little bit of heat. Stay in it too long though, and you have a problem obviously. But in Origins, you don't have any clear indicator of how much damage you're taking. For all you know, it could be equivalent to or even greater than a normal zombie hit, or it could just be tickling you. You have no way of telling. which makes you either overreact or underreact, and the lingering damage from it is just enough to kill you. Again, you have no way of telling. Just like the lava in TranZit, is it tickling me or is it actually doing substantial damage? Exozombies had a similar problem with its Atlas soldiers and Goliaths. Because there wasn't a health bar, you had no idea if their gunfire was hurting you all that much or not. Because of that, combined with the ticking timer of the mana core bombs, you're more inclined to play risky, and by the time you become red screened, you're not in good cover, so you just eat shit. Now, let's look at the Sturmkrieger from Vanguard Zombies. When it shoots you, the feedback feels like you're taking a lot of damage, but then you look at your health bar and it's just kinda chipping away at you. But if you know exactly how much damage you're taking, you can make the informed decision to either run for cover or take a gamble and take the brunt of it, praying that a zombie won't interfere. You can actively do the math on a moment-to-moment basis and make informed decisions against Brenners, Krasnys, and Sturmkriegers, whereas with Panzers and Atlas soldiers, you're kinda just flying blind. Now, I acknowledge that some may enjoy that style of uncertain, risky play, but it is 100% not for me. Now, let's talk about some of the issues that are specific to Black Ops 3. When it came time for Zombies Chronicles, they had a chance to slightly tune some of its more obnoxious elements, or maybe even improve the claw hitbox. Instead, they somehow made him infinitely worse. For starters, since it's built off of the AI of the Dreisendrache Soldat, it now becomes enraged and starts sprinting at you when you shoot its faceplate off. Since the player is significantly more nimble in BO3, that's not a bad inclusion on its own. But then, you realize something else. It is an absolute bullet sponge in every sense of the word. And to demonstrate just how bad it is, I asked a friend to take a look at some of the Panzer Soldat's scripts to see just how much damage it can take. Here are some of the findings. To start off, the Soldat has a 90% damage resistance to all bullet-based weapons in the game, a 50% damage reduction to all explosives, and a 50% reduction to all incoming damage directed at the power cap while it's on.
But the funds doesn't end there, guys. Oh no. No fucking way, bros.
It also gets additional buffs against certain high damage weapons, mainly the Haymaker, Brecci, and Dingo. There is one high damage weapon left unchecked though, the RPK. You know, the highest damage LMG in the game by a long shot. Because that weapon was added in after the release of Chronicles, the Soldat scripts were never updated to add an extra resistance. So if you're lucky enough to get an RPK in the early game, never let it go. But despite all of my grievances with this enemy, I kinda understand what they were going for. At least in Black Ops 2. Because of how much of a pushover Brutus was in Mob of the Dead, they probably wanted to make Soldats far more threatening in the early game, but if you put in the legwork and uncover the map's most powerful tools, your reward is becoming strong enough to turn them into red mist. It's basic player power progression. The problem is that the difference between the Soldat's two extremes is way too massive, especially in Black Ops 3 with their enraged state and insane damage resistance. This makes their presence incredibly disruptive to the early game, especially in solo. Because they're such bullet sponges, combined with their flamethrower and enraged states, you literally can't do anything with one around. You can't power a conversion generator, you can't open a portal to the crazy place, and because of where it's placed, you can't even pack a punch if one is on your ass. Again, I get the idea. An early game shakeup that puts you through the ringer is totally fine if you do it right, as later games proved with the Moistler, Blightfather, and Abomination. But this enemy just... it ain't it. Continuing with obnoxious gameplay intrusions, we have the night rounds. Every couple of rounds, starting from whenever you captured your 4th generator, night zombies will assault a random generator in an attempt to hinder your progress. If they succeed, the gen will be disabled, and you'll be forced to go through the conversion process again to power it back up. If left completely unchecked, they'll actually end up disabling every generator on the map. These night rounds aren't a bad idea on paper, and can be a fun little distraction when there's one within a reasonable distance, but the problem is that there's zero checks in place to make sure it's always possible to stop. For example, it's not all that uncommon that you'll be chilling at generator 1 or 2, and you'll see generator 6 come under attack. Even with speedrunner-esque pathing optimization, you literally cannot get there in time to stop it. So now, you have to spend time reactivating it if you want to use the machines at that location, or the pack-a-punch. Even better, let's say you just missed the generator. If you want that max ammo that the knights drop, you're gonna have to wait until they start attacking another one, because if you kill them during transit, they won't drop it, for some reason. And one last annoyance, Panzer Soldats can spawn in at the exact same time a generator comes under fire, and if you're late enough in the game, there's multiple of them to deal with at once. So to have multiple Soldats, a generator that's under attack half a continent away, and hordes of zombies all on your plate at once is just... it ain't fun. Again, the idea of diverting the player's attention away every few rounds is not a bad one. Funny Base Z did it just fine, but the way Origins did it definitely needed some tuning. And the last gameplay element we have is the mud. But not for the reason you would think. Across certain areas of the map, there's incredibly thick mud that slows your movement down to roughly 50%. To be honest, I kinda like its inclusion in theory. I know a lot of people hate it because of how much it slows your movement, but in a pre-Super Sprinter Zombies mode, you kinda need something like this, or as much as it pains me to say, the Denizens, to prevent these wide open areas from becoming piss easy street. Cold War and Vanguard both band-aid solution to this problem by saying, yeah, you can use these open spaces, but eventually, these fuckers are gonna rush you down like Usain Bolt. So maybe you should keep moving, huh? The problem I have with the mud is how it's, more often than not, improperly utilized. Placing it in those massive wide open tank routes? Yeah, that's fine. It prevents those areas from becoming too easy to play in and gives the tank transport a reason to exist. So why does it need to be in literally every area that the Giants walk through? These little spaces aren't big enough to be easy kiting areas, there's tons of drop down spawn points to fuck you over, and again, the Giants walk through these places pretty frequently, so there's already a bit of trade-off to utilizing these areas. It just feels a bit excessive is all. And finally, what better place to wrap up the bad than with the ending itself? Once Primus sends Maxus's Amazon drone form to Agartha, we instantly cut to the inside of a child's room? Why are they playing with toys of our Oh my god. Was this whole fucking thing a game? Wait, I thought Fluffy was dead. What the fuck do you mean your dad has a plan? What the fuck was that? I sound actually mad about this. This was pretty much everyone's reaction to this ending back in 2013. Confusion, followed by shock, anger, back to confusion, and then right on back to anger. This entire ending comes out of nowhere and is so woefully out of place with the darker, more serious tone of, well, literally everything else about this map that came before it. More importantly though, nothing about it made sense in the moment. Sure, by the time Revelations had come out, almost 3 years later I might add, we finally understood just what the hell this was all about. But that is the problem. This ending was so poorly communicated that no one was entirely sure what it actually meant. Was everything a child's game in their room? Did some of it actually happen and this is just another point in the story? And if that's the case, which parts actually happened and what was the conjecture of children? How do the multiple buried endings factor into this? Do they even factor in? Or is Origins actually a full-on reboot? All of these were common questions for years. Not because the story was so masterfully crafted that it kept the audience guessing like Mob of the Dead, but because this entire ending was so poorly executed and out of left field that nothing about it made any goddamn sense. As much as I dig Blundell's run on zombies and respect what his direction did to revitalize the mode when it desperately needed it, this is a massive problem that pervades almost his entire catalog, including his other projects like Black Ops 3's campaign and the Chaos Zombie story. The way his stories convey very important information to the viewer is often so poor that you don't really know what the hell is even happening until much later. A lack of proper story conveyance and desire to be mysterious for no other reason than, ooh, look how cryptic our story is, really hurts a lot of Blundell's projects, and it all started right here. With the good and bad covered, let's round this all off with some nitpicks. And believe me, there's quite a few here, especially in the Black Ops 3 build. When breaking chunks of armor off of the Soldat, the debris chunks that land on the ground are still the pieces from the DeviantArt model. The Soldat uses the wrong siren sound in Black Ops 3. This is the sound it should be using. God, that thing triggers my fight or flight every time. Even after powering up Generator 5, the Stamina Up machine's on effects don't spawn in. The frozen gravestones that appear during the Ice Staff's upgrade quest can't actually be broken by explosives, the Mark II, or upgraded Mauser. So if you don't have a ballistic weapon in your arsenal, you better be ready to part ways with one of your guns if you want to progress. The Pack-a-Punch machine uses the normal sound instead of the one it had in Black Ops 2 and Der Eisendrache. For comparison, in Black Ops 3, the Mauser doesn't have proper recoil values set in its weapon file. Come on, guys. Crusader zombies have blue eye textures, but still use the yellow eye glow effect for some reason. In the spawn room, if you stand at the very back and look at the door to Generator 3, you can see fog incorrectly appearing in the doorway. On the Pack-a-Punch machine, when it's broken into pieces, you can see missing polygons on some of the internal wheels. The LODs on the Giants are all sorts of scuffed, leading to there being super obvious gaps in the models and really jagged edges that take you right out of the experience. Wait a second, the eagle-eye viewers among you might interject. They look totally fine in the footage you have. You're right, they do, because I spent a few hours completely reporting the models one weekend to make sure they looked really nice in the cinematic footage. Call it fucked priorities if you want, but if you can do something to make a video just a tiny bit better, you might as well, right? So overall, Origins was a really solid, albeit imperfect new start for zombies. Origins came out swinging, with a strong layout, tons of content, solid world building that set up all sorts of new mysteries, a unique visual style, and it did a great job of reinventing our iconic cast. However, these strong points are somewhat dragged down by some very obnoxious gameplay choices, and one of the most asinine, poorly executed endings that I've seen in a video game in a really long time. But despite its faults, Origins was a monumental step forward for zombies at the time, and still holds up pretty well today. Even though some of the gameplay decisions scream, we're still figuring out the style of map. And that's okay. When you're starting something so different, it's only natural that there's gonna be some growing pains. Well, that's all for today. If you enjoyed and you would like to see more, might I suggest my series of reviews on Cold War zombies, or maybe my review of Alpha Omega? Links to those will be in the description if you're interested. Now, as for future content, I've actually made a shit ton of progress on my Persona 3 retrospective, which will probably end up being close to 2 hours long, but I'll be honest, I needed a bit of a break from the heavier subject matter. So that's why this video exists. It's a nice little fun palate cleanser, you know? Unlike my other projects, I've been sharing script segments with some friends, discussing what could improve them, and what would just be neat to add. It probably has another month or two in the oven, and not to toot my own horn, but god damn, I am loving how it's coming together so far. I know it won't be most of y'all's cup of tea since most of you sub for zombies, but that's alright. The only thing that actually matters to me YouTube-wise, whether it be zombies or whatever the hell I'm doing, is that the people who do tune in, enjoy it. And really, that's all you can ask for as a creator, to make somebody's day just a wee bit better. After that's finally finished, I'll probably make more reviews like this one, where we take a look back at some of the really old zombies experiences, while we all wait for Treyarch's next title. I keep saying Mob might be fun to look back on, but maybe some slightly smaller scale reviews like Verrückt or Shangri-La could be fun too. Or maybe that round-based Shi no Numa reimagining coming to Vanguard in Season 4. I know it's easy to clown on Vanguard, I do a fair bit of it myself, but I genuinely hope that ends up being good. We'll just have to wait and see. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.